Hello. Welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. I wanted to say hello differently because I feel like the last 8 different podcasts we do, I say hello the exact same way. So that's why I did that, in case you're wondering. Today, we get into the music realm a little bit, and we had the pleasure of speaking to Ryan Hagan, who is a musician, songwriter, wasn't always a songwriter, had a major shift not so long ago, and he got into that and some other aspects of his life that were really interesting, and I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. I just met Ryan earlier this summer at our mutual friend Minu, who's my Indian friend, who's a wonderful life coach, meditation teacher, Reiki person. And Ryan walked into her party and we just kind of clicked, and I'm like, you got to come on the podcast. So I found out about him that night, and I found out much more in this conversation. So enjoy our fun and lively and very diverse conversation with Ryan Hagan. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be on. And Sean, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, man. I'm looking forward to jumping into your story and seeing what you got for us.
Absolutely.
All right. So the turning point question is, many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to question their so-called reality and when their childhood beliefs maybe no longer work for them. So do you remember when you became a seeker?
Well, I think my whole life I've always just been a curious person, and I've allowed that inner child part of me to come out. But I would have to say 2018 is the moment of reckoning for me. My life turned completely upside down. And I think that would probably be like the mountaintop of turning points for me. At least when I look in the rearview mirror, that's the one that registers for me. And life is such a beautiful thing, and you think you're coasting along, and then the universe throws you a curveball, and all of a sudden everything changes. And so 2018 for me was the turning point. And here I am in a completely different career than I was living in a different place, with different people around me, lots of growth. And so, yeah, that would definitely be the landmark for me.
Okay, that's the teaser. Now, what are the deets?
Yes. So, most people, when I first moved to Nashville, had no idea that I was a musician. Of course, anybody that knows me today, that's what they sort of identify me as. So I was in athletics. I was an athlete for the large part of my life, and then went to college, did the 4-year degree, sort of the traditional things, checking off all of the American dream boxes. And I always had a passion for music, but never gave myself permission to pursue it. And in fact, in some ways, it really wasn't encouraged for me to go down that path. There's sort of a scarcity mindset of sorts where it's like, how can you make a living doing this? It's very risky. And so I had a supportive family in the sense that they knew that I had talent, but it was always sort of like preordained that I would go down a different route. And so I did. And I was absolutely unhappy, and in many ways was in and out of depression, had a lot of anxiety, and I could never pinpoint what it was about what I was doing because I was doing everything right. And for those who are not watching and they're only listening, I'm using air quotes. I was doing everything right. And it was sort of like I started opening up to the universe, and just sort of at that time, I strongly identified as Christian. I really was not open to any other, truths that were out there. So I started praying and opening up, asking for direction. And boy, did I get it. So I was living a corporate America, very comfortable lifestyle. And I had a very nice salary, benefits, fun friends, lots of all the materialistic things that people identify with happiness. And the reverse was really true. It could not have been any more unhappy for me. And I was living a life that really wasn't mine. So 2018 comes around. I have an abrupt and very uncomfortable ending to a romantic relationship. My friend group started to change. People started to move. Others started to distance themselves. Family members were sort of spread out. I started losing a lot of the comfort zone that I had. And I had, as I mentioned, been in and out of depression, especially like when I was in college, and had sought some help through mental health counseling, which was helpful. And for a brief period in time, I sort of experimented with antidepressants and sort of the pharmaceutical approach to numb it out. And I knew that I was not going to go down that path again. And so I tried, out of complete desperation, I tried meditation. And my world was rocked, let me tell you. So there's the kind of pop culture meditation. There's apps and things like that, which I'm not knocking those. I think those have a place and they're important. And it was kind of my window in to the world of meditation. But let me tell you, the things that came through, the breakthroughs that I experienced, and, I was really in the middle of what I would call the dark night of the soul, and meditation really helped illuminate my path and what was going on. And so that's really the turning point that opened me up to spirituality. It opened me up to allowing myself to entertain the idea of pursuing my passion, which was music. I was in a corporate job, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, living the dream, right? Except I wasn't happy. So the fact that I wasn't pursuing what my purpose is here was what was holding me back. So I started to ease into giving myself permission to kind of get into the music scene here in Nashville, which is above all things, it's amazing. It's beautiful, but it's also highly competitive. A lot of talented people here. So it's not like you can just walk down the street and say, hey, I'm a musician. I've never done music before, but we should work together.
Yeah.
So a lot of talented people, it's kind of hard to break in, but the doors just started opening as soon as I really aligned, I think, with what my path has always supposed to have been and what it is. So I hope that's maybe like the first course now after the appetizer.
No, that lays the groundwork for kind of what you were hinting at there. I love that it was out of complete desperation, and after trying everything that you found meditation, which is as now, it's available to us kind of whenever. There's not. Yeah. Sometimes it can cost money to take a course, which I recommend in a lot of cases. That's actually how I found meditation, was through Corinne. She was my meditation teacher 11 or 12 years ago. Kind of happened out of happenstance, I suppose, very serendipitously. But it's funny that we could just start with meditation and yet we don't. It's not really a culturally accepted thing, although it is kind of a cultural fad at the moment too. You have kind of both sides. It's like it's such a powerful thing, and yet we just kind of dismiss it as, well, yeah, it's a great way to rest. It's like, sure, it's a great way, but it provides many other benefits to our lives. So I'm glad you finally found it, man.
Thank you. Yeah, 100% identify with that. I wish I would have taken the meditation pill quite some time before and not gone the hard path. But I tell people sometimes I'm God's slowest student. So definitely not perfect, but I found my way to it, and it really did open my mind up to things. And I'll tell you also, just coming from kind of the Western, evangelical background, even though the word meditation is in the Bible and discussed and addressed, it was sort of like that was an off-limits thing. And it's almost as though that was just too edgy And so I never gave it the time of day. And anytime somebody said things like, oh, meditation, this or that, I mean, it was like literally the light switch. I turned it off. I just was blocked out because that was just too spiritual, right? But here I am, the very guy that like I was so opposed to back then. You know, when people ask me what my beliefs are, it's just easier maybe to identify as spiritual versus, oh, I grew up Southern Baptist, you know, or whatever. So yes, absolutely.
Well, and it's what's funny about that kind of what you're pointing at is prayer is discussed a lot, you know, and I kind of differentiate, and I'm not the only one. I'm sure I heard this from somebody, but you know, prayer is putting out the question. It's like what you were talking about. It's I need an answer. I need some guidance, and meditation is the listening. Meditation is the stillness that the answer comes from, and there's such an emphasis on the manifestation and the asking questions, and it's, you know, putting out your needs to God or the ether or spiritual, you know, spirit, whatever. But meditation is truly sitting in that silence, and to kind of bring it into the arena of Christianity is listening then for the answer. The interesting thing is the answer, and you've probably experienced that, the answer isn't necessarily the most comfortable answer to the question, and it usually points you in a direction that doesn't necessarily make sense to you in that moment. But there is a powerful gravity nudging you in that direction, you know, and so it's good to listen. Yes. It's good to meditate.
Yes, you have put so many words to the things that I've experienced and felt, so I could not identify with that more. It was very uncomfortable to think about stepping out of the comfort zone. And there was a lot of, you know, we know that one of the basic human needs is safety. So there's one of the things that went through my mind. It sort of flashed, what would happen if I do become this sort of, you know, starving artist? Is that the life that I'm supposed to lead? And then I sort of had to weigh, you know, what is it about to me? The way that it looks or the way that it feels? And I think ultimately the way that it feels won out. I'm a big proponent of mental health. So I believe that our emotions and our feelings are guidance. They're not, you know, I don't know how you would say, maybe like a bother. A lot of people feelings pop up and they sort of like want to press them down and suppress them, which is what I did for such a long time. And then meditation, when it came out, I started to think maybe I should embrace this. You know, what I'm doing is not working. Let's try this path. And sure enough, it has just, as I said, led to so many landmarks along the way beyond just the 2018 Dark Night of the Soul. It's opened so many doors that I was worried about not having the chance to even see. And it did definitely take some faith and some trust, but at every turn, the universe, God, creator, whatever words you use, has always provided. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, is to feel that there truly is a purpose for each person. And in my case, my purpose was, you know, to explore healing through music, not just for myself, but also to tell my story to other people.
And I want to get into that for sure, but I also want to talk about the transition when you started meditating and how that reconciled. You've already talked about that, just felt right, but how was that reconciling when you started meditating? And because I've always, you know, felt for myself and also taught my students that, you know, meditation really brings you closer to what your truth is inside your God, whatever that is, whether it's through a religion or through a personal just connection without a religion, right? So how was that transition and the shedding? Is it still happening? Was it challenging? How is it with family?
Yes. So I think probably the hardest part, and anyone who has gotten into meditation that's come from my background, a lot of times the hardest part is the stillness, because we're so used to busy. We're so used to the go-go lifestyle. And we're so used to, as I said before, sort of numbing emotions and things that are, you know, uncomfortable. And in meditation, when the silence happens, it all comes up. And it doesn't come up to hurt you. It comes up to heal you. But I would say the first challenge for me was to really allow that process to happen And I've talked to a couple of friends over the years that they've sort of been inspired by the way I talk about meditation, and they go, gosh, I just don't know if I can do this. I can't focus. And I'm like, you're not supposed to focus. It's just sort of let things happen as they, let thoughts that come to you cross. And, but there is sort of this sweet spot when you start to drill down, and you get into a deeper state of meditation. So when I started to taste that sweet spot was when I was like, okay, there is something to this that I've been missing. As far as how my family reacted to it, I had a little bit of a hesitant, I was hesitant for a while to open up about it. But I think there is kind of this common ground, I think, now that we're finding in the psychology, mental health space, and the spiritual space of meditation. I find that often those two are way more similar and overlapped than either side gives credit for, just my personal viewpoint. But I think the more that I sort of just accepted and sat with things, the less I was concerned about what friends or family would think. And I think even some family members may have tried it and not necessarily let on just yet, but I have a sense that has possibly happened.
Oh, nice.
So, but it's interesting because everything shifts, when I think you embrace that. And I think I also just grew intolerant to sort of the lifestyle that I was in. And it was not hard to see from the outside the frustration with that discomfort of, okay, you have all of these things that you're supposed to have, and yet that's not your path. And there was this natural friction that occurred. And I think for probably a period of 12 to 18 months, it wasn't hard to tell that I was going through it. I was going through something challenging. But here on the other side of it, I think there's something to getting to that place of peace and having a more consistent experience of peace and just accepting that people really get interested in. And they go, what has changed with you? I've learned that when you just drop the word meditation, people can kind of go, oh, okay, all right, But at the end of the day, it does open up the conversation. So I hope that touches on the question you asked.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like, that was my experience too, although I didn't have the dogma of religion, if that's okay to call it that, that you had or been raised. I was raised much more, open. My mom kind of studied all religions. And even though I was raised Catholic, we weren't, it was a Latin church and we didn't even speak English. I don't know what they were saying. So I didn't have that big, but that big thing to let go of. However, what I have found for myself and what I feel like you're describing so beautifully is the meditation, it just kind of smooths out all the edges. If you sit in it and allow, those fears and those thoughts and the discomforts and the emotions to come up when you're in the silence, they just want to be felt and shone the light on to understand. And then it starts to smooth out all the edges and you can listen more clearly the direction you want to go and people that you're drawn to. And it just, you don't have to quit your habits. They quit you. It's just such an elixir. It's an elixir and it's this armor too at the same time. It's just so, and I just love hearing stories. One of my favorite, not everybody has a really profound experience the first time or when they first get into meditation, like you have, and I certainly had. We've had a couple people, wouldn't you say, Sean, that have had, like Valerie Gangas. She for sure had a first time meditation was she literally she was about to kill herself because her mom had passed, and then she literally found God when her first meditation. It was just huge. Wow. And for me, my struggle with a 3-year-long ulcer completely disappeared the first day I started meditating, and the first week I got a sense of inner peace immediately. And I didn't even know I needed inner peace. I didn't know what inner peace was. I didn't know I didn't have it. All I know is that after I started meditating, it was all of a sudden there. And so I just love hearing this because that was 30 years ago for me. And so I love hearing somebody more recent that still, experiencing the same thing. So no, you explained it just perfectly.
Well, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our mutual friend, Minu, who was a extremely pivotal and important part of what I would call spiritual awakening. People use different words, but those are the words that I resonate with. I really feel like a light bulb went off for me, and it was a light bulb. And I know that you both have discussed this on other podcasts. It's a light bulb that was always on until being socialized in our culture turned it off. So in so many ways, I feel like I've really gotten back to who I've always been. And so Minu was such an important part of that because she didn't judge me due to my skepticism. And I was in no uncertain terms skeptical. And I told her this. But experiencing Reiki and energy healing and just being at least open to the possibility that these things were real. And especially the way that she taught me meditation, she was very confident. And yet at the same time, she was not judgmental of my skepticism. And that skepticism turned to curiosity, and that curiosity turned into belief. So I did have some wonderful teachers along the way. And in so many ways, she's still a teacher to me, even though that we're much closer friends now, years later. So that was something that I felt like was also instrumental into me maybe expediting that process into meditation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful to find teachers and mentors. When I got into it 30 years ago, there was books by Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer and Marianne Williamson, and I could go on a seminar with Deepak with 500 other people, but there was really, I had my meditation teacher, but I wasn't really close to him. And so I feel like, and for whatever reason, it's just so available now. There's so many wonderful teachers and coaches and mentors. And, ultimately life is our teacher, and we're all teachers for each other. I'm starting to kind of lose that. I've been a teacher for a long time, and I'm starting to kind of take that hat off more and just it's just sometimes I'm the teacher, sometimes I'm the student, and it's kind of all the same thing. We're all here to help each other. So and that's how we met too, is at Minu's birthday party, right before, I guess it was in July before I left for Canada. It was just 2 months ago, a month and a half ago.
The universe conspires, right?
Yeah. And we were like, I think we were like the two of maybe the only white people at the party, because it was a lot of Indians. And I kept saying, we shouldn't but it was not just that we were white, had nothing to do with it. We were just like, our conversation was just, we kept being drawn back together to talk. I'm like, you got to come on the podcast.
Yes. Well, one of the beautiful things that I learned about you in that brief period where we had some exchanges was you identified as a student as well as a teacher. Yeah. And I think that is so important. Not so that somebody can sort of like, be self-deprecating, like, oh, I'm not a teacher. I think it's a beautiful thing if you identify as a teacher. Yeah. But the best teachers are also students. They never stop learning. And so in some ways, if I do talk to a friend who may be trying meditation out or may be going through a crisis and they're sort of open to my experience, I never look at that necessarily as like, I know better. But at the same time, when I go through things, I feel comfortable going to friends who I've met just in the spiritual community, and there's no ego involved. And that is what I feel like. And I know people use different terms for ego, but I suppose what I would say is that there's an element of humility there, because just sort of knowing that we've all experienced the gamut of emotions and we've all been in various places. And I think that's what's been so beautiful about sort of noticing the landscape of my friendships and relationships and things changing, is just stepping out of the need to sort of identify as one or the other, and the thought process that you could actually have both at the same time. So I loved that about you, and Sean as well. I've listened to the podcast, as I've mentioned before, and just both of you, you both have that spirit about you, and I really, really appreciate that.
Well, thanks, man. I mean, that's actually how kind of Corinne and I's relationship evolved from teacher-student to, co-travelers, co-seekers. And it's kind of a weird transition because you can start to identify as a student, and it can become dysfunctional in a way where, I'm only a student, and then you start realizing that the best teachers are even better students. They just have been learning longer, and I think that's kind of what we resonate with. And I mean, we just did a retreat in June. Corinne just got back from a retreat. I have 3 kids, so I'm constantly learning. There's really not a point where I think if you're honest with yourself, there's not a point where you're never not learning, and you're never. It's because that sense of self is constantly blossoming, that's constantly opening, and there's new layers, and it's more richness and it's more darkness at certain times, and it's just constantly evolving. And so to say that, no, I'm a teacher now, not a student, that would in almost every circumstance seem disingenuous. And even some of the most, what I would say the most awake people that we've spoken to on the podcast, at no point was that sentiment felt. It's always, actually, what's funniest is the people that are the most awake and the most open tend to be the most serving, the people most available to.
Yeah, less ego.
The most humble. Yeah. It really gets to that point, and it's kind of breathtaking to a certain degree, because you're like, man, you didn't see that angle until you get even deeper into that seeking adventure.
Yes, I love the words that you put to that experience. I think one of the things that has been so interesting to me on this path is that a lot of times when people come to me, like, as I mentioned before, I will have on occasion a friend that will hit me up and they're going through it. And so we'll sit there and talk about it. And they may be expecting some sort of answer or something from me. And I'm sitting there empathizing with the story, and I'm learning in that process.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and I know this is commonly discussed as well, and you mentioned the word, Corinne, dogma. I think that there are times where spiritual teachers, and perhaps unintentionally, can at least communicate in a way that can be perceived as dogmatically. Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a beautiful aspect to life, is that not everybody's journey is going to look the exact same. And perhaps we're here for different reasons, learning different things. I could be on a lesson that somebody learned quite some time ago, and they could be on the stage of their life that I experienced a long time ago. And then you get into almost like, past lives and things, and that sort of opens up another discussion. But it's interesting that, I can offer my experience and sort of the thoughts that may come up for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for that person. And so in a way, I think the best teachers, as I say, have always, at least in my experience, come across as very humble, and they'll offer, what's worked for them. And yet they leave the door open that perhaps this isn't right for you, but here's my words. Do you resonate with it or not?
And that comes full circle back to meditation, because meditation, if like I used to, and I kind of still do, but I'm trying to be flexible with it, but it's a requirement for me when somebody comes for spiritual life coaching, the first thing we do is that I teach them how to meditate, and they meditate regularly. And then if they're not willing to put the time in to meditate regularly, then I'm not going to coach them. And I decided that a long time ago when I first got into coaching, and because I know that that'll make my life easier as a coach, but much more importantly, it's going to make their life easier. And that when we're meditating regularly, we're naturally drawn to the right books, to the right people, to the things, that are, we're in the flow. When life, as it does, brings us challenges, there's just a lot more grace to it. It's, doesn't mean that challenges don't happen, but when they do happen, we have the capacity to deal with it and face it head on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's why I call it the elixir. So it comes full circle. Yeah. Full circle. Okay. So so much to talk about. So I'm trying to figure out which direction, because there's like two, I know there's many sides to you, but there's two sides that I want to touch on today. First of all, I just need to ask if you're open to talking about, we'll get to the music. We've got to get to the music because I want to, share that with everybody. But I'd also love to hear what else has opened up for you spiritually.
Yeah.
In the more esoteric realm, maybe that we touched on a little bit when we first met.
Absolutely. So I have mentioned a couple times already that, I came from this sort of conservative Christian evangelical background. And so I was very much indoctrinated into that. And let me practice what I preach. That may very well be what's right or work for some people. I will be blunt. It did not work for me, and it was not right for me. I did take some nuggets from it that I thought were important and have been beneficial to me on my journey. But there were a lot of things that I perceive anyway to be sort of based in fear. When I could look at the glass half empty or half full, if I'm constantly choosing that it's half empty, it just sort of sets you up for maybe that feeling of energy of fear. But I think when I was younger, I had a lot of experiences that typical American family would explain away, like, oh, well, Ryan is 6 years old and he's saying that he's seeing things and he has an imaginary friend, and how cute is that? But, we need to at some point sort of tell him it's not okay, little Ryan, to do that anymore. And I think kids are so open and in many ways are spiritually they almost come to parents, I think, in some ways to teach parents, but they're so open and their light is so bright and they have no concept of, oh, this isn't socially acceptable and this is, right? But they learn it very quickly. So I had a lot of experiences where I feel like I saw spirit. I have a grandmother on my mom's side who had passed before I was ever born. And I can remember several experiences where I either feel that I saw her, felt her, or actually heard things from her. And I can remember my mom had a tough week at work, and I was very young. I was maybe 7 or 8. And we were sort of snuggled up watching a movie together. And I just started getting very emotional, like I was crying. And the movie wasn't sad or anything like this, but I just started saying things about mama. And so I have a mama and papa on my mom's side. Both have now passed, but at the time my papa was alive. And as I mentioned, my mama had passed before I was ever even born. So I didn't even know that was her name. I didn't know. And so I was just sort of feeling this emotion of missing and having a sadness there and kind of a longing for a connection. And so whether I was empathically picking up on my mom or that was mama coming through, I think that there really is some, even if you want to go down the hard science route, there is some evidence that's out there growing to support that consciousness really doesn't ever expire, and how difficult really is it to connect the dots, that there is a way to connect with someone's consciousness who may have physically passed on. So at the time as a kid, I didn't know any better, but I just sort of learned like that sort of thing is not okay. Shut that down. And in 2018, it all came flooding back. I would have experiences along the way, being in haunted places and stuff and seeing and feeling things. And but meditation is what really opened that up. And I think in some ways I don't practice as a medium, like publicly, or I don't have a TV show or anything like that. Who knows? But I think the interesting thing has been working with friends and even some family members who have opened up to this and seeing how healing it has been. So many people leave perhaps unresolved issues sort of in the vault. And then isn't it beautiful to think that spiritually one of our, past loved ones could come through to sort of create healing or to drudge that up, not to hurt us, but to heal us. So I really believe that those experiences are valid. I would on occasion have dreams and things that would happen. Perhaps we've had experiences of deja vu. So I started talking myself out of this, right? Like, oh, this can't be happening. So I would start journaling what I was dreaming. And then a month later, I'm not thinking about it and it happens. Maybe not the exact way I saw it, but essentially it happens. And I'm thinking, what in the world have I opened myself up to? But all of those things, as I say, came flooding back. And I just feel like when I put the fear aside, that removed the block to connecting to the other side. So I know some people will hear this and think that I'm crazy. It's maybe not for them, but it's my experience. And I think that it can be used as a healing modality as much as it is, as we see in pop culture, used to sort of impress people or entertain. It can be that, and it can both be that and healing at the same time. But I think mediumship is used to connect people so that they can experience human connection and love, but also healing.
Beautiful. Sean, I just want to distinguish because I won't be long. I just want to say for anybody listening doesn't know. So medium, like a psychic is usually somebody that that can tune into what it's called the Akashic records and maybe can give you some they kind of tap into your life without knowing you, but both past, present, and future. And a medium is typically somebody that can connect to somebody who's crossed over on the other side and messages. And that's what Ryan's explaining. I just wanted to give that distinction. But our listeners are usually pretty into this stuff. So.
Absolutely.
So Sean, sorry to interrupt. What were you going to?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I mean, it's interesting how, the conversation of sixth sense, that was such a thing for a while in culture, and it has kind of gone to the wayside. And what's interesting is how that manifests differently for, everybody. I mean, I haven't met a lot of people who are in, well, also the culture that I know of were pretty different in general. So that, extra sense perception would manifest differently just based on the sheer small amount of people that I know in this community. But,
yeah.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this in terms of intuition, because we've discussed intuition a lot recently, and by what sense is intuition experienced, right? It's, some would say, well, it's all your senses. You're putting them all together, and it's, you're psychologically making these connections that aren't otherwise there. It's like, okay, maybe, but the more time you spend, I call it the ether. The more time you spend in the ether, meaning that space of openness, you take that that space of calm peace for meditation, and you walk with that then. And the more you stay in that space and that flow state, the more shit gets weird for you. The more things start kind of flooding your experience in
Yes.
ways that you're open to, and that you kind of use curiosity. That's a great word for it, because I think it's healthy to be curious and when those things come up. But of course it seems weird if you're shut off to that, and then it just bombards you. But the more open you are to those experiences, whether it be in meditation or whether it be in chanting, whether it be psychedelics, it kind of doesn't matter. It starts flooding your version of reality in a way that is very unique. It's like a fingerprint. It's a spiritual fingerprint to a certain degree, and your perspective shifts. And so, yeah, I can relate to that. Certainly, my family background would not support anything like that or anything that I've experienced. But at the end of the day, I can't not have that be a truth for me. The intuition, some of the things that come into my experience, and I'm sure for you too, it's like the only other option is shutting that back down. There is no real in between. This is what's real, and I'm not going to put it back in the box that it came from.
Absolutely. And, I think about, as I say, ever the skeptic, I think about when I was really trying to figure out what was going on, and I would almost want to test myself. So I had a couple of friends that was sort of open to this. And, I think one was even sort of like would watch every season of Long Island Medium. And if he were here, he would tell you, I would always make fun of him because I was like, this is all made up. And this is just, they're interviewing these people before and all these things. And what's ironic is that my teacher wound up being the teacher of the Long Island medium, Teresa Caputo. So it just sort of 6 degrees of separation. But even in the scientific world, there's a gentleman, Dr. Gary Schwartz, I believe is his name, at the University of Arizona. And he was Jewish, but was not practicing. I think his family raised him sort of I think his parents were scientists. And so they were sort of very hard science materialists, not spiritual people. So he stumbles across some research on mediums that interest him. And he decides, well, I'm going to once and for all put the nail in this coffin, I think is the way he describes it. And so he has a medium sitting in a room, and he has a very expensive piece of equipment that measures photons. Now, photons, for those who aren't into quantum physics and all that stuff, are like particles of light. And consciousness could be perceived or understood scientifically in that way. So goes the theory of the study, right? That if there were truly something happening, they could measure it when the medium is not actively engaged with spirit, and then measure it when they allegedly are. Well, wouldn't you know, the study 3 times over proved that when the medium sort of turned themselves off and was not sort of checked into the other dimensions, the rates of the measurements of photons were lower. And then when they were tuned in, and they had names for the spirit and everything, that I can't remember that. Sophia, I think, was the name of the spirit that would come through. It would skyrocket, like measurement wise. So we're even seeing, hard scientists and skeptics going, gosh, there really is something to this. And so I'm to that point where, I'm really not necessarily concerned about somebody, whether they believe me or not. I don't think that's for me to care about. But if I do encounter somebody that has a message that's being sent to them, or they have an interest in trying to connect to somebody that's passed or crossed over, what a beautiful spiritual experience it can be. And for quite some time, I would be doing, I guess you could call it a reading. I would be doing a reading for someone. And I'm just thinking, I have to be making this up. And I mean, I'm getting names, I'm getting dates, I'm getting all kinds of things. And a lot of it, the experience is, it's almost kind of metaphorical. A lot of the things that come through are symbolic. And so the medium is tasked with sort of taking the information that they get and turning it into something that's practical and able to be understood, by as they say, the sitter. So there's a lot of interesting aspects of this that are actually being proven scientifically, and poor Dr. Schwartz thought he was getting ready to put the nail in the coffin to mediumship, and he's only opened it up more. So it's a really interesting study for those who are listening that want to go check it out.
Well, I love it all. I was kind of raised, my mom was believed in reincarnation. Like I said, she studied all religions. I remember before I was born. So I came in very spiritual. I had a deep connection to spirit when I was, very, very little, definitely had imaginary friends. And then so one of my cousins who was very close to my mom, who was very Catholic, they used to have these conversations back and forth about reincarnation. She was very Catholic, didn't believe in it, didn't believe in, life after death, that you could communicate. And my mom, they'd have these debates. They loved each other, but they'd have these debates. And my cousin happened to she had some liver disease. So we knew she wasn't going to live very long. And so they made this deal that whoever died first would come, if they were able to, they'd come back and have a sign for the other one. And so Luann passed away when I was maybe 11 years old. She was in her 20s. And the night that she passed away, a mirror came crashing down. There was like 2 or 3 things. There's a mirror came crashing down in the hallway. And because my mom has always told me, and from what she read or whatever, that the souls on the other side that have passed recently, they can usually pretty easily control electricity. That's like the easiest thing. And sometimes objects too, but electricity is one of the easiest. So my mom's clock in her room stopped for an hour in the middle of the night, and none of the other clocks in the house stopped that were electric, because they used to have the old plug-ins, back in the 70s, everything plugged in to the wall. And so there was those two things. So I always remembered that. And then cut back to when my dad passed away, just be 2 years ago, July. I was actually, I was with my dad the last couple of months, and it was very beautiful. He did medical assistance in dying, which in Canada you can order the lethal injection if you're terminal and you're going to die anyway. And it's a beautiful, compassionate, way to go. And the nurses were amazing and helped everybody explain to us exactly what was going to happen. So we went through all that. And the next day after Dad's passing, I was in the kitchen and hadn't really thought about, I thought about probably before he passed, I wondered if he'd make a sign, but he was such a skeptic. He was kind of an atheist. He always said, well, if there's a God, he's an asshole because he's a shit to me. That was always what he would say. And he was a bit of a negative guy. And that was one of the things I was excited about. I said to my nephew on the way, the day before he passed, I'm like, I'm just kind of excited for when Papa passes, because then he's going to realize that I was always right. And then he'll be out of his suffering, his emotional and physical suffering. So anyways, in my mom's kitchen, and my sister's upstairs doing something, and I turn on the light in the kitchen, and there's like a major flickering, which has never happened before. It's the lights underneath the cabinet. And I flicked it off again, and then flicked it on, and they're flickering. And I'm like, Mom, there's something wrong with these lights. And she goes, oh, it's probably just your dad. They've been divorced for 45 years. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. This is like, he's just passed less than 24 hours ago. And then a few hours later, we're watching TV, and the TV just shuts off just for no reason. And so then I went over and it wouldn't turn on again. And then I went over and turned off and on the like modem, and turned on the modem. And then something weird happened. The TV came off, but the modem was the TV came on, but the modem was off, and there was no reason for the TV to, it was all these weird things. And it was about 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And I'm like, okay, Dad, we just want to watch the movie. So we know you're here. It's all good. We acknowledge you. And then TV came on. And then the next morning, my sister is going to be leaving back to Vancouver, and she goes and has a shower in my shower at my mom's place in Canada. And she comes down, she says, is there something wrong with the fan in your bathroom? And I'm like, no. And she goes, well, it won't turn off. And I'm like, really? And she goes, yeah, I've flicked it off and on a couple of times. It's stuck on now. And I'm like, okay, but guess that's Dad. That hasn't happened before. And so I went up and I flicked it. So it stayed on, right? My sister left. I went and have a shower a few hours later, came out of the shower, and I flicked it. I had it on off. And just as I was walking out of the bathroom, it went off. My hands were not near the switch. It just went off out of it. And I was like, and then there's one last thing. And then the next morning, got up, same bathroom, and there's 4 vanity bulbs. And they're usually you can't really see the filament inside a bulb that is frosted, but anyways, I woke up in the morning, I turned the light on, and my eyes went to them, and it was like, what? And the filament was my dad's initials, LC.
Wow.
I was like, seriously?
Leave me alone, man.
My gosh, I just got chills.
I took a picture of it. It was so clear. It was LC, Larry Champagny. So Dad's definitely, happy on the other side. I feel him all the time now. Just feel, I don't need the signs. I just, can feel him. So
yeah. When I was going through the hellacious year that was 2018, I would, and I still to this day do, I see the clock when it's 6:31, whether it's in the morning or in the evening, or my receipt will be $6.31, but 631 constantly comes up for me, and that's the area code of where my dad's parents are from on Long Island. And so I see that all the time, and I really do think, and it's not a cliche, I truly do believe that they're over there advocating for us, they're over there rooting for us, and they want us to see the love and the positive things in this world, and they're there with us just as they would be if they were here in the physical, so I find it very comforting and healing, but that is telltale signs of spirit. So for those who have Netflix and have an interest, there's a really neat show. I think it's called Surviving Death.
It is called Surviving Death. Yeah.
And there are some interesting stories on there, and there are, thousands and thousands of stories like this, but, people who have become brain dead on the operating table, and then they are somehow 15 minutes later miraculously resuscitated and brought back to life. They were getting ready to stop the shocks, and bring them back. And so, a very significant amount of time that these people would be biologically dead, and not just the cliches of, I saw the bright light, which I think is real. But beyond that, coming back and reciting the exact words that were said by the physician in the ER room, the way that they were situated physically, who was standing where, gestures that they would make, thoughts that they would, all of these things that there is absolutely no way that they could have come back to life and be able to record these memories. So there's some ongoing research, and it's gaining traction on the idea that consciousness does not just die. Physically our bodies may, but consciousness is neither created nor, expires. So as I say, my experience, so I'm careful to say that for those who are skeptical, this is my experience. And there are a lot of other people out there that have some compelling stories. I just don't think you could make all of this up.
And it's like anything else. Some people are drawn to it, and so they have those experiences. Some people aren't drawn to it, and they still have those experiences. And what it's like, and there's always, the pendulum always goes. There's some people who are totally skeptical, and there's some people that just believe in it, like without any discernment at all. And then, I like to hope that I find myself somewhere in the middle of it. And it's like it's like anything else, using it to help and assist, but not relying on it completely 100%. It's like, it's there to help us be a tool and to heal and to feel connected, and not there to be spent, on, 100% of the time, or rely on it 100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the interesting thing for me as a musician is experiencing a right, as we call it, when we're songwriting, and having a story come to me that I know is not my own, and yet could be so relatable to people that do follow my music. And I didn't really put two and two together, maybe until even a year ago, that I was writing all of these songs that, of course, some are personal and, relate to me, and also some are not. And having no idea where they come from, but yet seeing so many people go, gosh, I love this song that you wrote. I can really relate to it. And it really challenged me, or I just love listening to this when I'm having a good day, or, if I'm having a bad day, I really love it. And going, gosh, okay, well, I wish I could tell you where it came from. And I didn't think, that could be a spiritual download, maybe. It's just beautiful to think that there is a connection that is never lost and can be accessed. And I think we all really, I can't act like I'm the only person. I think we all really do have these innate abilities. We have these, as you called them, almost psychic abilities, these spiritual abilities. And I think that the more open we are to it, maybe the easier the signs are to notice. But to your point, when the TV is turning off on its own and the lights are flickering and they're like, hey, I'm here, just wanted to verify that you were right.
Well, and what's funny is like it's coming from that flow state. It's coming from that open space. And that's where artists who are in that flow state are creating from. It's interesting. We've had a couple podcasts, and one in particular, we talked about how how parallel, artists' experiences are to the self-reflection process. And, in this case, music being the art form. When you get into that flow space and you're open to receiving that signal of that song, how many times does it seem like the song is being written through you? You are the facilitator of that song being written, but one of the interesting things is how many times you write those songs when you're in this very unique space of creativity, this curated, safe space. Maybe you're extra vulnerable, maybe, whatever it is, but you become hyper aware and hypersensitive to that internal world. And then the song comes out. It sounds like, as you're saying that, you didn't actually say this, but for some reason, the discernment of when you were talking about from a mediumship standpoint, you're likely receiving that information from the same space. You're opening up, you're connecting with that flow state, and then the information comes. It's very similar, I imagine, for you when you sit to do either one.
Absolutely. And you used a word that I love, used to hate, but I love now, which is vulnerability. And there is this there is this connotation that vulnerability is weakness in our society. So Brene Brown, if you're listening, this is definitely your work. But I think for anybody that has done anything that is creative, it is an extremely vulnerable thing. I mean, for one, let's just be practical about this. People can like or dislike what you do creatively. So there's a vulnerability there, that you may experience rejection or something like that. But I think also one of the most vulnerable things that we can do is tell our story and be authentically storytellers through music. We know just from history that music wasn't always necessarily used that way, but it is the way that we commonly use it today. And so to tell your story, to have the courage to do that is in and of itself a vulnerable thing. And how many of us have shared experiences, and we can point to a song that we really relate to. And while the artist or the songwriter may have been coming from a different perspective, the words themselves sort of in some way connect you to your experience. It's just, music is just such a beautiful thing. And I think it is a spiritual experience, whether you're listening to top 50 or, country hits, or whether you're listening to audio, instrumental only music. I think music is it's a healing modality, which is, as I say, like one of the things that really hit me is that, as I started to shift my perspective in 2018 and became more conscious, thinking about the idea that as I healed myself, my story could also speak to others. Maybe not everybody, but the people that it's meant for, that story could reach them. And that my way of doing that was through music. Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is, yes, I'm sure you felt very vulnerable and exposed while you were going through that, because, all of a sudden, things are, they haven't been aligned, but you're becoming aware that they're not aligned in your life. What your purpose is, or what is going to move you, what's going to drive you to have a fulfilled life was out of sync, right? And so you might have at one point thought, well, I'm so strong because I got this, I got all my safety mechanisms in place, and yet it made you brittle. It made you start to degrade faster, whether it was emotionally, spiritually, because of how out of sync you were. You mentioned depression. You mentioned some of these things that, yes, you have the quintessential life. And yet, because you're not aligned with it, there is not a strength there. And so being vulnerable is what brought you into a space of strength. And that's usually quite opposite for a lot of, it's very counterintuitive, particularly men. I mean, we have a very difficult time being vulnerable because we're taught that being vulnerable, being exposed is a weakness. But there's a difference between being vulnerable and being weak, but also knowing that you're vulnerable can become a great strength. And that's that's why I think it is important to have this self-reflective journey, because you start to become very aware. And I'm sure, as you say, dark night of the soul, I can only imagine, because I've been there, I can only imagine the slew of things that take over your experience. And you start to realize how fragile or how weak you are in certain areas, and how much strength you can grow when you start actually looking at some of these elements in your life. And yeah, you're right. I mean, music, art, anything that is going to cause you to create something from a core-centered space of spirituality, or whatever you want to call it, it's a perpetuation of fulfillment, because it doesn't matter what comes out of it. That process is energizing, and it can be very cathartic to do. And if you're shutting that off, or if anybody else is shutting that off, it's going to just drain you slowly over time.
That is amazing, the way that you phrased all of that. I 100% identify with that. I think that I did experiment with songwriting prior to my awakening. But boy, is there no songwriting like when you are vulnerable and you're sitting in the discomfort and you're putting it all out there. And it is scary as something that you would have to bleep out if I said it. But I will say that those songs that I put out there are the ones that people most connect with and appreciate. And it's almost kind of like, now I'm like, gosh, this is just going to be this way, isn't it? Forever, universe. That the more scared I am to put something out there, the more vulnerable it is, the more people connect with it, which is like, you're not supposed to heal me and them at the same time. Come on.
But we're all one.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's all available. It's available.
We're all one, and we're all the same. We're all human beings. We all have the same, all over the world, no matter what religion or color you are or how old you are. We are all human, and we all have the same emotions and feelings and want the same things. Everybody.
Yes. It's a collective consciousness of sorts. And so, Corinne, I believe I shared this with you, but one of probably the axiom for my guideposts on my musical journey came from when I stumbled across something that it changed my life. And it was, kind of an anecdote from the ancient East. And so it comes from the Mandarin language, where there are lots of symbols. And I have a friend that speaks Mandarin, and he was like, goodness, this is a hard language to learn, because I think I could be ignorant here, but I think there's like hundreds and hundreds of symbols. It's a very complex, difficult language, or it can be. So it's based on symbols, and symbols often build on each other to mean different things, somehow related. But the symbol for medicine in Mandarin is built upon the symbol for music. So music has always been understood to be a healing modality, at least to these ancient generations, before it was ever entertainment or anything else. That was literally understood to make people well that were not well, and to heal people. So I have always felt that there is sort of two beauties to music. One is the sound itself, which a lot of times will come to me first when I'm songwriting. But the second thing, the sort of like double-edged sword, is that it's the story as well. And in our culture, the way that we do music, we tell a story and we put it to music. So it's both that actually influence us. And not to take this a negative way, but also we understand that the vibration, if it's not in a balanced vibration or a positive vibration, it can be taken on by the body in a negative way. There's all kinds of studies and things into that as well. So that's why I think the more conscious I can become as a musician, the more I can extend healing to the world. And as I mentioned, the more I heal myself. And there are these moments of discomfort, but I believe that is ultimately what music really, really is it's a healing modality.
Oh man, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of traditions. I mean, Native American tradition, drum circles, but I mean, so many different chanting, Indian chanting. I mean, and there's stories built into those, and it's generation, and it's the wisdom that spills into the song, and it brings, whoever's ailed, into that vibration, and then they can receive that healing. And that's part of, you mentioned a psychological bridge, earlier in the conversation, and being in the space to receive healing consciously can change the dynamic of that process. So whatever that mechanism is, and I'm not downplaying music because I've been in music production my whole life. I feel that deeply. Whatever the mechanism is that is putting you in that space to receive healing will bring you closer to that healing. And the fact that we kind of shut off our wisdom from that by intellectualizing it too much with, I'm not saying science is bad. Science is fantastic. We have so many advancements from it, but everything can have a dysfunction, and the dysfunction is cutting yourself off from the wisdom of the emotional, the spiritual aspects of this reality. And as you know and are becoming quickly acquainted with, there's a lot of other things happening within our field of experiences, and the content of experience that is the teacher, and listening and meditation being the vessel for listening is powerful, man. It's going to get you there.
Absolutely. Something that came to my mind as you were talking is something. I'm an avid listener to y'all's podcast, of course, but also to Oprah Super Soul Sunday.
Hell yeah.
And she was talking about, I think she co-wrote a book with a doctor, a neurobiologist, I think. And sort of the takeaway that I had, the theme of the book is, instead of asking the question when we hear somebody's story or we experience them, usually in a negative way, what's wrong with you? Ask the story, what happened to you? And I think that can help sort of, I'm going
nice
to the four agreements. I'm going to, it's not personal. Everything's not personal, right? So if somebody cuts you off, a lot easier to take that anger out on them than it is to sort of reflect. But also, I think in our interpersonal relationships, when we can ask and get curious about where is this coming from, and that I've found has been very helpful to me here recently when I'm trying to write things, because there are these moments where I think it's okay to experience the anger or the resentment or the things that have hurt me from the past, but also to sort of like pivot from that after I release that and go to compassion. That's what has been so fulfilling, I think, for me here recently in my more recent work as I'm songwriting. And I think just being able to kind of hold two things at the same time and go, gosh, this really hurt, but man, I really grew. And also, gosh, what a hard situation this person must be going in, that their hurt is spilling over their cup and affecting other people. So in that storytelling aspect of music, I've experienced a lot of growth and healing, and I've learned a lot about myself and my triggers and things just from putting it all out there. So songs that aren't even out there of mine, like I go back and listen to, and I'm going, gosh, I feel it. I learned from that. There was growth from it. So absolutely.
It's beautiful. Beautiful to hear about your process and how you've integrated into your, sort of new way of being, your beingness now, and your meditation. And, songwriting for me, even when I was young, writing poetry is how it started for me. But they were always love songs, but they were always love songs for God. They sounded like a love song from if a person didn't know, but they were always spirit talking to me and me talking to spirit. Like that's just how it was, like my therapy session. Whenever I would put pen down, it was like spirit totally talking to me and turn it into a song. And it was like my complete comfort, for 30 years.
Yes. And so much of our music today is about love. And here I go on Brene Brown again. What do people talk about when they talk about love? When you ask them about love, they tell you about heartbreak. And so a lot of our songs are crafted to sort of touch on that. And we talked about how vulnerability is tough for men. And I can think of some of the most stone cold, withdrawn, masculine men sitting in the car, and a song comes on and you see a tear start to come down. And it's like music does that for them in a way that perhaps other things could not. You know, they may laugh at, you know, mental health therapy, and they may not want to see a shrink, or they may not want to talk about their feelings. But boy, when that song comes on, and whether it's the music or the story or both, it penetrates and hits them in a way. And I think that has been an encouragement to me to know that it's not me per se. Maybe it is, but it's not me. It's the story. It's the energy. It's the lesson. It's the growth. It's the emotions. It's all of it coming out. And music has this just beautiful way of combining all of those things together. So,
yeah, you can't deny the perfect reflective surface, and that's what songs, and you know, it becomes a mirror for people, and especially if it aligns strongly with where they're at that moment. You know, it's like you're gonna look at it eventually. You might not want to look at it, and I mean, how many times Corinne has watched me? I'm sure plenty of times not want to look at or not even be ready to look at, you know, certain reflections of truth in life, and as you know, and what your experience has been, is that reflection follows you. It's ready for you always. And the moment you start looking in that, you know, mirror and start self-reflecting on, you know, everything in life and you as a person and your story, your experiences, your identities, and it'll tell you what you're ready to hear. Or you'll hear what you're ready to hear. It'll tell you everything, however you put that. But
yes, I think maybe it was a yogi. It was one of these great sort of teachers, maybe even like a shamanistic thing, but someone very profoundly once asked the question, or said, perhaps the greatest question, or one of the greatest questions, is what feelings are you unwilling to feel? And I think that is where there's so much there for us. Because I'm not perfect, and I will be experiencing something and going through it, and I'm going, why am I feeling this? And then I will oftentimes find that there's something underneath that I've not wanted, as you say, to be reflected to me.
Yeah.
And our interpersonal relationships, especially our romantic relationships, are those not designed to be mirrors to us?
Completely designed to just push all those buttons.
Absolutely.
Perfectly.
Yes. Yeah. And perhaps they didn't install the buttons, but they may have pressed the button.
They can still press them if they're there. Like one of the teachers say, it's like if there's a button is a wound, and somebody can't push it unless it's already there.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and what did this person come into my life to teach me? Exactly.
Yeah. Whenever you ask that question, that's a question of really vulnerability and insight, and you know, that just opens it up instead of the resistance of pushing it away. I did a Hay House Writers Workshop. Hay House is a big publisher that publishes all the spiritual books. And I did their writers workshop last year. And one of the things that one of the writers said, talking to these newbies, is like, your book should be the thing you least want to write about. Anything you don't want to share publicly and don't want to write about, that's exactly. And what you're talking about is the same thing.
Wow. And see, you just did that for me. That is such a growth thing for me. I needed to hear that. I love that. There's something just so sweet in that, and yet also sour, because you're going, oh gosh, I don't want to, I'm on the edge. I don't want to jump. But that's powerful. That is such powerful stuff. And yes, I'm familiar with Hay House. A lot of amazing books have come out of there. Yeah. I would love to hear more offline sometime about your experience with that.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I'm still a member for another couple of weeks, I think, but they have a membership and all that stuff. So it's really helped me with my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, we could go on, and we have gone on, and it's been fabulous.
Yes.
Just
absolutely.
Like meeting at the party. It was like, bah, 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 bah.
I know. I had such a good time. And Sean, it was a pleasure to meet you. And Corinne, as always, had such a beautiful experience in sharing with y'all. And thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about me.
Oh man, thanks for sharing. It's not easy, especially when you know that I don't know how many people are going to listen to this, but there are people going to hear it. It can be tough to do something so close to your heart. So thank you very much. That self-reflection process, that's the most noble thing we got. So kudos to you, man. Welcome to the party, and I wish you well in your journeys for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Same to both of you.
All right,
Until
man.
we meet again.
Take care, Ryan.
Bye.
We are in the Say More section with Ryan Hagan. I did not expect it to go there, even though you told me there's some, somewhat mystical aspects to his awakening, but I did not see medium. I was not expecting that, and that's a cool angle. I enjoy these conversations. There's only been a few of them with people who are somewhat newer to the path of self-reflection and seeking. He has this sigh of relief about him, like thank God
I finally found home.
Well, yeah, I mean, just this gratitude for escaping the thing that he thought was the right thing in life that was not serving him. And I always think about how many people are probably in the same space where they're doing the social right thing or the cultural or the familial right thing, quote unquote, air quotes all over the place on that, but it's not aligning with their spirit. And the suffering and the struggle that comes into place when you're not living a life that is aligned with your spirit, or however you want to say that phrase in whatever terminology, it's then it's a wonderful thing to see someone like Ryan who he just wears this, I can't believe that actually happened, that I came out of this. And it does. We haven't talked about this much, but it does seem by it's some grace that awareness, that awakeness, or that spark just comes into our life and makes us look at it all. So
yeah, some of us, it takes a little push, a little pain, and other people get pushed off the cliff kind of thing. And he's kind of halfway in between. I mean, he kind of is living a very different, well, not kind of, he's living a very different life than he was. He was totally, athlete, corporate world, religious background and family. And, but what we talk about is that he still has all the same values and he's still who he is, but it's like this expansion and this shedding of the conditioning that happens, as we come into this world as little babies, and we learn how to walk and talk. Even depending on where we live is how we learn how to talk. We learn how to speak English in this country, but there's other countries you learn different languages. And so it's the same with our conditioning, whether it's religion or politics, or, what we should do for a living, where we should go to college, if we should get married, like all the shoulds. I always say it's like shoulding on yourself. And he should on himself until he stopped shoulding on himself. And sometimes we get those wake up calls with, like I said, being pushed off a cliff. Mine was an ulcer. I had a stomach ulcer, and his was some anxiety and some mental health issues, some depression. What was yours, Sean?
Well, you name it. I think it was. Yeah. It was a lot of similarities to Ryan's. Fortunately, career path wise, lifestyle wise, I did take the alternative route. But where my dysfunction was, or where my dysfunction, I guess, developed, was not living that honestly. And I think that's kind of the thing that keeps coming around as I think about when we talk about, belief structures. And, his upbringing was Baptist and Southern Baptist. And the being a part of a community like that and having the core values that you can get from a Christian faith like Southern Baptist, that's not the wrong thing. That's not the thing we're talking about here. It's when the beliefs and the programming drives you to a place that is dishonest from your being. And that's kind of what I felt was I was doing things that even aligned with my outsiderness, however you say that. I was very obviously from a young age going to be going down a different path. That's always been true. And yet I still got to a place of being out of alignment even with that, because it was the reason why I was doing it. It was, being counterculture just for the sake of being counterculture. And it was resisting this just because, I don't know, it was more from a rebellious space. And then I wasn't aligning with the truth as they'd unfolded. And as you know, and have experienced, my story of that is even working in the music industry and having that, more freedom, alternative lifestyle, you can still grow to a space of not being authentic. And I did that, and very, very clearly now, but at the time it wasn't very authentic. And I think authenticity is a mechanism we feel deeply. We can recognize it in the way we feel, but it's not so obvious that we're not living authentically, because when you're growing up and you're trying to find out where to go or how to be, you start looking for markers. Family is a great marker to start with in a lot of cases. Not always the great case to look, And so we look for these markers to dictate and guide us through some of these paths. But the moment that our paths become not authentic or not honest, that's where this tool of self-reflection is so important and so valuable, because it can show you, and then in Ryan's case, you can experience a clarity for your path, and then you got to trust, and you got to move, and you got to walk through that, and that tends to go against the grain. But I think people suffer more when they ignore the call to be authentic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what's one of the shifts, there's the boundaries breaking down in all the systems, a lot of the systems, whether it's the gender neutral, more push to be more open that way, or feminine roles changing, women's rights, and Black Lives Matter. It's all these things are shifting and falling away. And I think that living your life authentically for you is something that's happening to more and more people. And they might not recognize that it might show up as not being happy in your marriage, or not being happy with the job you went to college for, or being drawn to unhealthy relationships, ulcer, body issues, discontent. And like I said, in Ryan, it showed up as some depression and mental health issues, and just this unease with life, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a question that I ask people when they come to me and say they think they're meditating already, and they meditate like 5 minutes a day before they go to bed or something like that. Or they, and I say, well, how is your life? Do you have inner peace on a daily basis? Are you happy with the trajectory of your life? And do you have more good days than bad? And are you content? And that's how you know if you are being authentic and living an authentic life. If you can answer yes to all of those, then you're living an authentic life. And if the answer is no, I'm not happy, I'm not feeling comfortable in my body, there's some relationships. I mean, there are going to be bumps in the road, no matter. That's when you're in the flow and you're living authentic, life is bumps in the road, but it's a deeper feeling. It's not just because it can be brick walls coming up, but it's also a feeling inside that can show up eventually as headaches, as ulcers, as migraines, as depression, as anxiety, that you're not living authentically and uniquely from your own being of what works for you. And that's different for everybody.
Yeah, and it is very differently. And that's why there's roadmaps that can kind of guide us, but ultimately you have to figure out how to take the right path. And what's really interesting is, 3 years ago, I took a major detour and, really shut down everything because I had this awakening and I finally did the thing that I was being guided to do. And at the time, I felt like I had to change my whole surrounding. I had to change everything I do. What I did was going to dictate who I am. And then I realized I was still at the mercy of what I was doing and the identity of who I was while I was doing it. And that's the biggest shift. And I think this has been we've resonated with this a couple times in different interviews where what I do now, as far as the activities and the job and et cetera, is very, very similar to the thing I've always done. But the why is different. And that's where we kind of settle into the piece of the why I do this is because this is the thing to do now. It isn't going to bring me any closer to a peace. It isn't going to bring me any closer to that space of awareness. Awareness is the thing to invite into the thing you're doing, not the other way around. And that subtle shift, as you say it with words, it's like, oh, that's it? It's like, well, yeah, but it wasn't that obvious. It wasn't so clear. And I'm grateful to have discovered that space. And that's why it's felt with Ryan, is because it's like, I know that what you're feeling is what I felt. It doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to be the same upbringing. There's a lot of similarities, but there's so many other synchronicities that line up with people who discover that space of awareness. And when you find it, it's really hard to turn yourself back off from that. You stumble around a lot. It's hard to let that grow up because there's just so much other things you're dealing with and so many other facets of your being that you're battling. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I kind of just went on a tangent, but I think that was in alignment with what we were talking about.
Yeah, totally was. I would kind of wanting you to be a little bit more specific, if you don't mind, because when we talk in terms of generalizations, it's harder for people to relate to them.
Oh, yeah. Like specifically 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to tell all the details, but just like, yeah, how know?
Yeah. So I was in a music project, a band that was about 10 years old at the time. And I had been getting messages for a long time, probably a year and a half, maybe, that it was time to leave. And I was resistant to that. I was convinced at the time that it was ego trying to distract me from the task at hand. And I just kept on growing and growing in this tension with the people around me. I was projecting so much of my experience onto other people, and it became very unclear because I ended up basically just getting into this fog of this. The message was, it's time to move on. And then my message, my credo to myself was, I'm going to do this to the very end, come hell or high water.
Yeah, I'm not a quitter. I'm going to see it out to the end. I've got to succeed.
And it was never in alignment with what I was projecting it to be. And that ended up putting more pressure on the whole situation because it wasn't, quote unquote, successful unless it looked like my projected perspective of success, even though looking back now, it was incredibly successful, and the growth that came out of the project and, so many aspects of it were successful. But in the moment, it didn't feel that way. And then that basically put a bad taste in my mouth about the music industry as a whole. I hated it. There was and then my projection of the music industry was like, everybody's against this. Nobody gives a fuck. Blah, 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 blah. All this negative things. And I became a warrior to the thing that wasn't even necessarily real. It's hard to, at this point, put that into context. But, and then we were building our house, and I was putting in incredibly long hours, and I was gone from the family, and then I was working, incredibly hard on the house, and then traveling again. And so there was this kind of come to Jesus moment where, and I gave myself an ultimatum, because that was, it needed to be done. Meg had something to do with that ultimatum too, is just, you can't keep doing that. She could see the dysfunction in it, and she could see that what I was aiming for wasn't worth my emotional and mental state that was degrading at that point. And so, finally I made the decision, and, that was actually a little over 3 years ago.
God, it seems like longer than that.
Yeah, it was 3 years ago.
On one hand, yeah.
I played the show.
Yeah.
And it was hard. I was shaking, going into that experience. I remember sitting in the parking lot before rehearsal, just literally shaking because I was terrified. I don't even know that I fully believed that was the right thing to do. Intellectually, I couldn't. It was the right thing to do, and whatever, by the grace of God was pushing me to do that, I knew enough to trust in that. But it was the hardest career thing I've ever had to do. So that was kind of in alignment with what Ryan was talking about with his job in corporate. That dysfunction can happen even if you're in alignment with your career choice, and that's kind of been my experience. Is my career choice is I'm in alignment with my career choice. I wasn't in alignment with why I was doing it, and I had lost sight of the passion and the joy that I get from being in a studio and being in a creative space. Now I understand that I can just be and experience that space for what it is without having to put a story or a timeline of success or a bar for success. It's a creative space that now I'm a cultivator of that creative space. And, that's something I've learned not from the music industry. That's from studying meditation, from studying with you in yoga, and being a part of Ivy House, and understanding how much space can be created by holding it with awareness, and then allowing whatever comes out of that space to be. That has been the lesson of my spiritual practice, and I'm just facilitating the music production job with that space of awareness, and there's nothing else to be aligned with. There's no other thing that is more important than that. And that when I said that's the vocation is to speak about awareness in the space and hold that for artists, and it's been amazing. It's been fulfilling in so many other ways besides doing the task. And that's what's rewarding, and that's what I mean is, being aligned with the why, and the why is because this is the space, that's the thing to do, instead of the goal or the achievement or whatever it is that you think you're going to get from doing that.
And that's the great distinction right there. Thank you for explaining that in so much intimate detail and beautiful detail, because I think that helps people, to see into your journey. And I think that's a great distinction, is that it's the motivating, what's the motivating factor? What's the why? And that's what I've come to after all these years too, is on the outside, it still looks like I'm kind of doing the same thing I've always done. I'm still teaching yoga, teaching meditation, although it's more online these days, writing my book. I still play a little bit of music, at Wellbeing Center, whatever, doing the podcast. Still seems like I'm doing like my like very spiritual yogi friends in India are like, man, you're just like got so much. You got the orphanage, you got everybody's always like, but it doesn't seem like I'm doing a lot because the why has changed. There is no why anymore. It's just, I don't do any of the things that I do to get something. I just do it because simply I enjoy doing it. There's no attachment to any of it. It's just a joy doing the podcast with you every week. It's fun doing the, posting it on YouTube and, all of it. And so I think that even though it seems like such a subtle difference, like why would somebody work so hard in their life? But I'll tell you, if you work on that, that is the key piece, is the why and the motivating factor, because nothing that we could ever do or be or get is ever going to be lasting happiness. It's always going to be very, very temporary fulfilling. And so the carrot's going to always be there.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but if that's why on the after show with Ryan, we talked about, I said, just as long as you keep doing your meditation on the spiritual path and keep centering in yourself, then everything else will fall into place. Because then that takes care of the detachment, because you're not grasping at the carrot all the time and not comparing others all the time. You're just who you are in yourself. You're staying in your own lane. You're not looking behind to see who's catching up or who's ahead. You're just there.
Yeah.
And that's what it is about. And that's what we're here to shine our light so beautifully and uniquely in whatever way that is.
Yeah. That the sweetness of awareness it's the best flavor. I don't suspect there's any better flavors out there. And I was convinced otherwise for, quite a long time. And so it feels peaceful. That's not to say that there isn't infiltration of thoughts trying to steal my attention, regarding that and trying to, that was probably one of the hardest things about getting back into music production was the overlap, the parallel, and you feel like you're living next to the ghost of everything else you've done. And it's so many things are there ready to fill that space back up with those same mechanisms. And I'm sure over the last year and a half I've come in and out of that, and it's only been recently that that there's an absolution about it. It's just that this is the way it is, and that of the other things trying to steal the attention are funny little thieves. They're just, it's hilarious now. But it is every day. It is constant. There's no escaping that. They're just allowed to play while I, go about my merry way, and that's what's fun about this whole journey. And it's not like it's been an overnight thing.
Yeah.
So
that's the truth. It is the journey. It's not the destination. It's, be here now. It's all here now. It's all here now.
Well, we got another one. We got another one in the playground of awareness. I'm glad Ryan, aligned himself with his passion and, is on a path of self-reflection. It's the most noble thing, I think. Yeah, it's maybe the next one is getting to that space of what I recognize in some of these greater, awakened people, where it's just serving awareness, self-abiding, awareness abiding at all times. That's the next noble, and there's no need to even call it that. It's the most magnificent and like beautiful thing that I've seen. So they're out there, and it's not something to aim for, but looking forward to that being a symptom of this journey.
And there is the paradox.
Yep.
There is the paradox. It's it's there. The journey is there, and there's just no destination. That's, I guess, the thing is there's no stopping point. There's no there can be ahas and plateaus, but there is no destination. It's never ending, infinite, and a wild freaking universal roller coaster ride.
Whee!
All right, hon. Love ya.
Love you too. Thanks for everything you're doing, getting these guests on. I'm going to do my best to get them out there and get the audio done for you because I'm backlogged. So can't wait till next time.
All right. Good night.
Bye.